This Sunday, my interview with former Vice President Mike Pence.
For me, the fuse was lit in mid-November.
His inside account of January 6th and how he broke with Donald Trump.
All I know is that what the president asked me to do, I would have violated my oath to the Constitution.
What he thinks should happen now that Trump is running for office again. Think a crime was committed?
I don't know if it is criminal to listen to bad advice from lawyers.
His thoughts on the midterms.
We had some surprising and disappointing results.
And who he blames for Trump's election denial.
I was disappointed in Mark Meadows' performance as chief of staff.
Plus his criticism of Attorney General Merrick Garland for approving the FBI's search of Trump's Florida home.
I have great concerns about his judgment and leadership at the Justice Department.
And his belief that the Supreme Court's decision overturning Roe v. Wade was the single most important achievement of the Trump administration.
I celebrate that from really the depths of my heart.
The former vice president opens up as he considers his own run for the White House. Joining me for insight and analysis are New York Times chief White House correspondent Peter Baker, Republican strategist Brendan Buck, Kimberly Atkins Stohr, senior opinion writer for the Boston Globe, and Anna Palmer, co-founder of Punchbowl News. Welcome to Sunday. It's Meet the Press.
From NBC News in Washington, the longest-running show in television history, this is Meet the Press with Chuck Todd.
Good Sunday morning. We are following the breaking news reports of a shooting overnight at a gay nightclub in Colorado Springs, Colorado. At least 5 people are dead, and another 18 so far are wounded. Police say the suspect was injured, is in custody, and is currently receiving treatment at a local hospital. The FBI is already on the scene and assisting local law enforcement. In a statement on their Facebook page, the club writes, "Club Q is devastated by the senseless attack on our community. We thank the quick reactions of heroic customers that subdued the gunman and ended this hate attack." Do stay tuned to NBC News for more updates on the shooting. You can get those at NBCnews.com as well. Turning now to politics. Republicans have taken back control of the House, squeaking into a narrow majority. But the biggest question after a disappointing midterm performance, the third disappointing election cycle in a row for the GOP, will Republicans rally behind Donald Trump yet again? 721 days before the next presidential election, Donald Trump became one of a small group of ex-presidents to announce he will again seek another term even after being defeated. Just one of those ex-presidents, Grover Cleveland, has been successful doing this. The timing of the announcement at his gated Palm Beach resort appears to be an effort to get ahead of several federal criminal investigations. And on Friday, in reaction, Attorney General Merrick Garland appointed a special counsel to take over investigations he was overseeing into the former president's role in the events leading up to the January 6th attack on the Capitol, as well as the former president's decision to retain classified government documents at Mar-a-Lago.
Based on recent developments, including the former president's announcement that he is a candidate for president in the next election, and the sitting president's stated intention to be a candidate as well, I have concluded that it is in the public interest to appoint a special counsel.
The Attorney General's goal is to create some political distance between that investigation and obviously the Biden administration. That's the reason for this appointment. Jack Smith is a longtime federal prosecutor who has most recently been working at the International Criminal Court at The Hague. Now, if Trump falters in his presidential campaign, there are a handful of Republican hopefuls that are ready to challenge him, including his former Vice President, Mike Pence. Pence's new memoir, So Help Me God, actually was out, perhaps not so coincidentally, the same day that his running mate, Donald Trump, announced. And he describes Trump's pressure campaign in the book on him to refuse to certify the 2020 elections, which of course culminated when rioters threatened Mike Pence's life. I spoke to the former vice president at the Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California, and I began by asking him about his likely run for president. The former president has said it's disloyal for some in the Republican Party to challenge him, and he's speaking about not just you, but Governor DeSantis, Secretary Pompeo. Do you accept the idea that running against him is disloyal?
I think the American people love competition. My loyalty is to my faith, to my values, and to America. And I think if we're a part of that debate next year, and our family will sort that out before the end of the year, Chuck,
right.
Or if we're just chipping in from the sidelines and others are in that contest, I think a good, healthy debate over the direction of the country is warranted. I mean, since the first days of the Biden-Harris administration, it's almost seemed as though we have a new Democrat administration intent on weakening America at home and abroad, whether it's the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, whether it be the gusher of spending that ignited the worst inflation in 40 years, the war on energy that's caused gasoline prices to go through the roof, a crime wave in our major cities, and of course, after undoing all the successful policies that secured our southern border, we now have the worst crisis on our southern border in American history. And so I truly do believe Republican primary voters want to hear a strong debate. They'll want to find our best standard bearers so that having won back the House, it became official this last week, we'll have a chance to win back America in 2024.
You laid out a reason why you think the Biden administration has led America down a path that you don't like. Why do you think voters didn't accept that premise in 2022? They clearly didn't in the battleground states. Why do you think that was? Well,
they did in many states around the country. It's in the state of New York, 4 new Republican congressmen elected, may well be the margin of the majority itself. In the state of Iowa, for the first time in a half a century, they'll have all Republican members of the House of Representatives. But Chuck, I take your point. I mean, a win is a win. I'm glad to see Kevin McCarthy will accept the gavel to be the next Speaker of the House, but I'd like to see more Republicans elected, and I'd like to see Republicans win the Senate and more governorships around the country. But for me, the common denominator had to do with whether or not candidates were focused on the future. As I traveled around the country...
That sounds like that's code for whether or not candidates were sort of in the Trump spell.
Well,
I think you're trying to be polite. I understand that, but it does seem as what you're saying is anybody that was close to Trump didn't do well.
But I think it's broader than that, Chuck. For me, as I traveled, and I went to 35 states in the last year and a half, campaigning for all kinds of men and women, running for statewide office and for the House and the Senate. And as I sort through the results, there really is a common denominator. Candidates that were focused on the issues that people are facing today and solutions for tomorrow, focused on the future, did quite well. But candidates that were focused on the past, candidates that were focused on relitigating the 2020 election did not fare as well. And we had some surprising and disappointing results.
You stopped short of saying that the former president is unfit to serve again. But his former Defense Secretary, Mark Esper, says he's unfit for office. Another former Defense Secretary, Jim Mattis, says Trump has no moral compass. Bill Barr, the Attorney General, he has neither the temperament nor the persuasive powers. Judge Luddick, somebody you admire, I know. Trump and his apologists are a clear and present danger to American democracy. Is he fit to serve as President of the United States for another 4 years?
I really do believe that's a decision for the American people. And President Trump has now announced his intention to seek re-election.
Don't you think your opinion matters to the American people? And how about this? The fact that you may run, are you sending that message without saying it?
Well, I'll keep you posted on whether I'm going to run or not. But I do think we'll have better choices. But what I won't do is I won't join those that want to dismiss the 4 years of our administration and all that we accomplished for the American people. That, as I write in So Help Me God, the president's leadership was central to our success in everything that was accomplished, whether it be rebuilding our military or decisions he made as commander-in-chief to allow our armed forces to crush the ISIS caliphate and take out their leader, to allow our armed forces to take out Qasem Soleimani, a man responsible for the death of hundreds of American service members during the war in Iraq. And it was the president's vision to cut taxes and roll back regulation and his direct engagement on Capitol Hill with members of Congress that saw us pass the tax cuts and reforms that saw 7 million jobs created, unemployment at a 50-year low. And so the policies that, and energy and securing our border and 3 Supreme Court justices are all a great source of pride to me. And in my book, So Help Me God, I try and make sure and give the president his due. I was proud to be his vice president and advance those policies that worked for the American people against an avalanche of opposition by the Democratic Party from day one, and frankly by many in the national media who were preoccupied with controversies and conspiracies and the Russia, Russia, Russia message that dominated for 2.5 years. And so I want to give the president his due. I mean,
You're making an ends justifies the means.
Well, many people that want to draw broad conclusions about the president or anyone else in the public sphere want to dismiss the balance of the record. In my book, I try and make sure and present it. But also, Chuck, I think I'm very clear in saying that the administration did not end well, that I took a strong stand.
Did Donald Trump damage the public? Let me ask you this.
That had to be in public because every other time the president and I differed, as vice president, I thought it was important that I kept those things in private.
Did Donald Trump damage the Republican Party?
When it came down to the peaceful transfer of power and doing my duty under the Constitution of the United States, we had the tragic day of January 6th and its aftermath. And all of that in totality is the president's record and the record the American people will decide upon.
Look, you want the public to try to split this. Are you concerned that Donald Trump's behavior post-election 2020 damaged the Republican Party and is the 2022 midterm sort of evidence?
Well, I think it really does depend on our candidates and whether or not Republican candidates around the country will learn the lessons that we learned through that tragic day. And frankly, in many of the elections that took place in the midterms. I'll never forget, I write about it in the book. It was the night before January 6th. The president and I were alone in the Oval Office in what was ultimately a tense conversation. I had made my position clear for weeks to him that as vice president, I believed I did not have the authority to return or reject electoral votes when the House convened to count the electoral votes for president and vice president. But there was great tension in the room. But at the outset, I remember the president looking at me, and he pointed out the window at the crowd that was gathering just off the South Lawn and in the Ellipse. And he said, "Did you see that crowd out there?" And I said, "I did, Mr. President." And he said, "Those people love us." And I said, "Those people love you." And he said, "Well, that's probably true." And then I looked at him very seriously and I said, "And those people love the Constitution, Mr. President." So I believe Republican voters and the Republican Party's future is ultimately grounded in us producing men and women who will stand up for the ideals enshrined in the Constitution and the Declaration, ideals Ronald Reagan stood for without apology, and that'll carry our movement forward for generations.
Does his behavior in January of 2021 tell you that he doesn't respect the Constitution?
Well, all I know is that what the president asked me to do, I would have violated my oath to the Constitution.
So that's not respecting the Constitution. He certainly didn't respect it enough to ask you to be disloyal to your oath.
The president of the United States in that moment was receiving counsel from attorneys who were telling him, as the Bible says, what his itching ears wanted to hear. He had, beginning in mid-November, dismissed some of the extraordinary and capable attorneys that were serving in the White House and serving in the campaign, and replaced them with a gaggle of lawyers who brought in conspiracy theories and made promises that they never kept. I write in the book about how it would be a year after that tragic day that one of those lawyers, Sidney Powell, actually said in a court filing that no reasonable person would have assumed that what we were saying was factual. Now she tells us that the president was receiving terrible advice from people who not only shouldn't have been in the Oval Office, they shouldn't have been let on the White House grounds.
You made that point a couple of times. You praised John Kelly for how he managed that Oval Office and managed who came in out of it. How much of what happened on January 6th is on the hands of Mark Meadows?
The president's got to rely on his senior team. The term gatekeeper sounds offensive to the American mind. You think of open government and access, but what General John Kelly did when he became White House Chief of Staff, and what frankly all the best White House Chiefs of Staff have done throughout history, is make sure that the only people that get into the Oval Office are people that have the credibility to be there. And make sure that the president understands what they're coming to talk about, so he's in a position to be able to make the decisions that only a president can make. General Kelly created that order, and sadly, when he left, Mick Mulvaney, I think, did his level best as an interim chief of staff to bring that about. But I was disappointed in Mark Meadows' performance as chief of staff, particularly at the end. But from very early on, when it was clear that he had talked the president out of White House coronavirus press briefings, and in a very real sense, I think his tenure as chief of staff did not serve the president well.
It sounds like it's not just on January 6th. Are you saying that a lot of the COVID misinformation that sometimes came out of President Trump's mouth was due to Mark Meadows' lack of gatekeeping?
Well, let's talk about COVID. I have some great chapters.
No, I do want to talk about that,
so
and I plan on it, but I want to ask you about Meadows specifically. Was he a bad gatekeeper then, too?
Well, I've always believed that in a public health emergency, more is more when it comes to information.
Okay.
So we very quickly began press briefings on a daily basis, and I think they served the country well. But once we went through that early difficult period with COVID, and the new chief of staff started his tenure, the pressure began a month or so into the pandemic to move away from the briefings.
You imply it in your book that meeting with the lawyers, when you had the campaign lawyers, and then on the speakerphone is Rudy Giuliani and some of these other lawyers, you concluded that in some ways they helped foment the insurrection on January 6th, that was the moment that you seemed to go, that they went down the wrong road. Is that how you intended it to be read?
For me, the fuse was lit in mid-November.
In that phone call by Rudy Giuliani?
No, the Oval Office was filled with advisors. The president's campaign advisors were there. The other senior members of the staff. Yeah. On the speakerphone were the new lawyers that were vying for the opportunity to lead the election challenges. Justin Clark, who is an extraordinary attorney and a man of great integrity, was telling the president about the dozens of lawsuits that have been filed challenging election results around the country, and he was painting something of a pessimistic view about the prospects of those. But the campaign had every right to file those lawsuits, and that's the process that we have. States conduct elections, and if there are questions about irregularities or fraud, they're to be brought into the courts that can review the evidence and the law. But they were painting a picture to the president that things were likely not going to be successful. But when Rudy Giuliani said over the speakerphone that your lawyers are not telling you the truth, Mr. President, things got very heated. But in that moment, it was a new low.
Do you think the president
there was shouting, there was yelling, but in the aftermath of that meeting, the president made the decision to replace his capable campaign lawyers with this widening circle of outside attorneys who ultimately led him to the conclusion that I had the authority to overturn the election, which was demonstrably and historically false.
Do you think the president committed a criminal act in fomenting the insurrection? Do you think a crime was committed?
Well, I don't know if it is criminal to listen to bad advice from lawyers. Truth is, what the president was repeating is what he was hearing. from that gaggle of attorneys around him. And, presidents, just as like all of us that have served in public life, you have to rely on your team. You have to rely on the credibility of the people around you. And so as time goes on, I hope we can move beyond this, beyond that prospect. And this is really a time when our country ought to be healing. And frankly, the Justice Department's actions have been exposed from during our administration, where FBI agents were advancing political agendas, falsifying records, using what came to be found out to be opposition research paid for by the Clinton campaign and the Democratic Party, the so-called dossier. And then this past summer, when we see the Justice Department execute a search warrant against the personal residence of a former president of the United States, I think the American people, join me in hoping we can move past this contention.
But is he above the law? I mean, if he violated the law, should he be held to the same standard that I would be held to?
Chuck, no one's above the law. But I would hope the Justice Department would give careful consideration before they take any additional steps in this matter.
When we come back, Mike Pence weighs in on Attorney General Merrick Garland and his decision to authorize a search of Trump's Florida home.
I have great concerns about his judgment and leadership at the Justice Department.
Welcome back. Central to the special counsel investigation will be Trump's removal of government records, at least 300 with classified markings at his Mar-a-Lago home. In the affidavit used to obtain the search warrant in August, federal prosecutors cited an obstruction of justice statute because Trump evaded a subpoena for months. Justice was trying to do this without the FBI, and as well as a section of the Espionage Act, which makes it illegal to possess national security documents which could be obtained by a foreign power. On Friday, Trump's former Attorney General Bill Barr said he actually believes the Justice Department probably already has the evidence they need to indict Trump. But in my sit-down with Pence, taped on Thursday, the day before the special counsel announcement was made, the former vice president struck a different tone.
I've not hesitated to criticize the president when I think he was wrong. And clearly possessing classified documents in an unprotected area is not proper. But I have to tell you, I was on the Judiciary Committee for 10 years in the House of Representatives. I know how the Justice Department works, and there had to be many other ways to resolve those issues and collect those classified documents.
They tried for a year.
They didn't try everything. And I have to tell you, going to the last resort of executing a search warrant against a former president of the United States, I think sent the wrong message. It was a divisive message in this country. But I think worse still, it was the wrong message to the wider world that looks to America as the gold standard. And
doesn't it send the message that nobody's above the law in this country, that our democracy is so strong?
It is.
It can handle the idea that, if former presidents commit a crime,
but Chuck,
they don't get a pass.
But Chuck, you follow foreign affairs as close as anybody in your business. And it's much more commonplace in the third world that when one leader comes in, then they prosecute and jail the previous leader. America should never be associated with that image at all. And I truly do believe and hope that the Justice Department will give careful consideration to any further steps in that light.
You must have really not liked it when the president, when he was in office, how many times he wanted to weaponize the IRS? He wanted to order. You've seen these reports. Perhaps he didn't say it in front of you. But do you think the former president respects these institutions?
I'd let him answer that, but I never had reason to believe that he didn't respect men and women who serve in law enforcement at every level. In fact, everywhere we go around the country to this day, I have people in law enforcement thanking me for the support that we gave them. At a time when the Democratic Party was giving voice to the defund the police movement and assuming the worst every time a tragic incident happened in a police shooting, that they saw in our administration a reflexive willingness to support law enforcement, to seek the facts, find justice, make sure justice was served. But in all the time that I served in the Trump-Pence administration, I think it was very clear our administration stood with the men and women on the thin blue line, whether they were federal law enforcement or the rank and file serving on the streets of our cities.
Okay, but you did just hit the FBI pretty hard yourself in some accusations you made about politicization. You know, how do you square the two?
Well, I think the men and women that serve in the FBI, the rank and file, are some of the best people in the United States. I put the blame for the decision to execute a search warrant at the personal residence of a former president of the United States on the leadership of the Justice Department. It's inconceivable to me that that wasn't a decision that was made at the very highest levels and approved at the highest levels.
Attorney General said so.
And
he came out. He owned it. He did own it.
That's right. And I think he should have thought better of it, Chuck. There were preliminary steps. I want to be very clear on this. If they had additional evidence that there were additional documents, they could have gone to court.
They did.
Specific
everything
production.
You're describing, they did before. They didn't want to do it the way they ended up doing it.
Trust me, they didn't do everything they could have done and avoided this incredibly divisive step that sent the wrong message to the country and the wrong message to the world. If anything, I want to see the Justice Department, and I think a new Republican majority is going to be a part of this. I want to see the credibility of the Justice Department restored after years of politicization during the Trump-Pence administration. I mean, what went on during the time of Jim Comey's tenure in the 2016 campaign, the early days of our administration, the conduct of the FBI with regard to the Russia collusion hoax, on it went. And as someone who cherishes the men and women who serve in the Justice Department, and especially the FBI, I think now is a time for them to be focusing on restoring public confidence in our institutions.
You don't have confidence in Merrick Garland as Attorney General, Judge Garland?
I have great difficulty with the decision that he made. I have great concerns about his judgment and leadership at the Justice Department in the wake of it.
Up next, more of my conversation with Mike Pence and what he didn't like about the Biden administration's COVID response.
When President Biden came in and essentially empowered Dr. Fauci, I think the American people, I think they recoiled at that approach.
Welcome back. I also spoke to former Vice President Pence about the administration's record on the coronavirus pandemic. Asked Pence whether it troubled him, given his own role as leader of the White House Coronavirus Task Force, that Dr. Fauci has been so vilified on the right.
I think in the early days of the Coronavirus Task Force, Dr. Fauci was a great source of comfort to millions of Americans. He had an easygoing bedside manner that he communicated at the podium. And as I said, we always had a good rapport in those days, because Dr. Fauci, in my time leading the task force, always stayed in his lane. He was always the first one to say, I'm the scientist at the table. I'm going to tell you what the scientific perspective is. But he would almost invariably say, I know the president and you have a lot more to consider than just that. You have to think of the broader impact on the American public and on the country as a whole. And so, for me in those early days, he made an enormous difference in the development of a very balanced policy, empowering states, igniting the entrepreneurial spirit of companies around the country to develop the supplies, the masks, to ultimately the medicines and the vaccines in record time. But I must tell you that when the Biden administration came in and essentially turned over the management of COVID to Dr. Fauci, I was not surprised to see them put all of their emphasis on vaccines. And then after having promised that they would not mandate vaccines, then seeking to mandate vaccines on Americans. That's still a mandate on healthcare workers and military personnel today. That was the doctor approach. And I think when President Biden came in and essentially empowered Dr. Fauci. I think the American people, I think they recoiled at that approach, and sadly, the Biden administration lost more Americans in their first year with COVID than we did in our first year, a year where we had none of the tools, few supplies, no testing, ultimately no medicines until the end.
Is it on them that people wouldn't take vaccines? I mean, this vaccine, you were very pro-vaccine. You made sure people saw you get the vaccine.
Right.
The reason we had all these deaths was people that wouldn't get vaccinated. That was a stew that was boiling around in some of these, internet conservative circles.
I know that's the, forgive me for saying, but that's the cliche in the national debate.
It's not a cliche.
It was all
it's
about
the numbers.
vaccines.
It was the counties.
But again, Chuck, with great respect, Chuck.
No, I understand. But the data is the data.
The Biden administration focused exclusively on vaccines. Our administration focused on empowering states to provide them with the supplies, countermeasures for nursing homes, making sure that we had therapeutics available and distributed. There should have been an Operation Warp Speed on therapeutics. The Biden administration literally stopped the development of testing and ran short of testing by the spring of their first year. There was no effort to develop life-saving therapeutics around the country.
You don't accept the idea that maybe both administrations struggled with testing? I mean,
Well, no, we didn't have COVID testing when I was tapped to lead the White House Corona Task Force. With the entrepreneurial
with testing.
innovation of American research companies,
tests.
we reinvented testing from a standing start. I mean, we had done 8,000 COVID tests at the end of February. But by June, because of American innovation, because of American companies that we turned to and empowered to develop those technologies, we literally were testing tens of millions of people a month.
Still, the vilification of Dr. Fauci, was it you explained why it happened. Should it have happened? Was it fair? Is it fair what President Trump has said about him and what some critics of him? Do you think this stuff's been fair?
Well, this is a freedom-loving nation. And early on, we asked the American people to make sacrifices in those 15 days to slow the spread, so that what was happening in New York and New Jersey and New Orleans and Detroit and Seattle wouldn't be happening everywhere, that we wouldn't run out of supplies in our hospitals, that Americans wouldn't be denied hospital beds. And the American people shouldered that burden. But shutdowns were always just a temporary effort to essentially take a knee while we spun up the supplies and the resources to make sure that no American would ever be denied of the health care that you'd want any member of your family and mine to have. But the problem was, I believe that Dr. Fauci ultimately aligned himself with many Democrat governors who took what were temporary policies and made them long-term policies in their state. And the American people love freedom.
These Democratic governors, in their mind, they were just trying to save lives. Do you accept that?
Look, I never judge people's intentions, but I do judge their policies.
Okay.
And the truth is, we created a framework in those early days to ask for a pause in our economy so that we could make sure that our healthcare workers would not be lacking in the supplies and resources and masks and gowns that they would need to meet this moment, this unfurling pandemic, worst pandemic in 100 years. But I must tell you that one of the things I'm proudest of is that our administration, as quickly as possible, by mid-April, laid out a framework to open up America again.
Would you like to see a federal ban on abortion?
I have to tell you, it was such a joy for me when I was putting the finishing touches on this book to actually be able to reflect on the fact that after 49 years, with 3 Supreme Court justices appointed in our administration, we gave the American people a new beginning for life. The Dobbs decision not just overturned Roe v. Wade, but it returned the question of abortion to the states and to the American people. And I celebrate that from really the depths of my heart. You know, when When I was a young man, the most important decision I ever made was when I put my faith in Jesus Christ. I opened up the Bible. I read verses like, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And I set before you life and death. Now choose life so that you and your children may live." I knew in that moment, a decade before I would arrive in Congress, that the cause of life had to be my cause. And I must tell you, Chuck, to have been able to champion life in the Congress and as governor, but to have been a part of an administration that gave the American people this new beginning for life is something I'll cherish the rest of my life.
Is that the most important achievement of that, in your mind, of the administration?
I truly believe the opportunity to restore the sanctity of life to the center of American law may be among the most consequential legacies of the Trump-Pence administration, if not the most consequential. But I would also say, with regard to your question, that when Senator Graham introduced legislation to establish a 15-week ban on abortion, I thought it was useful. If I'd still been a member of Congress, I would have voted for it. It was useful in the sense of demonstrating that the Democrats' position is the extreme position. The Democratic Party today supports abortion on demand up to the moment of birth and taxpayer funding of abortion. But I recognize that this issue is likely going to be resolved one state at a time. Some states have already acted to advance the cause of life. And I've said to people, when the Dobbs decision was overturned, we haven't come to the end. We've come to the end of the beginning. And Chuck, it may take as many years to restore the sanctity of life to the center of American law in every state in this country as it took to overturn Roe versus Wade. But as long as I have breath, I'll be in that cause.
Are you you're a limited government guy. I know this, and you really are. Are you comfortable with the idea of essentially government-mandated pregnancy? If somebody doesn't want this child, doesn't want this pregnancy to go through, you're now advocating a law that essentially the government is ordering you to go through with this pregnancy. Are you comfortable with a government mandate like that? The folks in Kansas were not.
Our founding documents say we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. And the first one mentioned is life. And I think government exists to protect life, particularly defenseless life. And I intend to be a part of this. But I think we have an opportunity, Chuck, to approach this debate in a new and in renewed way. You know, when the Supreme Court took this issue away from the American people 49 years ago, there were strong dividing lines that have endured now for 2 generations. But now we have a political debate. And we have the opportunity not just to craft thoughtful protections for the unborn, but also to extend protections and support for women in crisis pregnancy and for newborns. I'd like to see us redouble our efforts to demonstrate the compassion of the American people, to live out the idea that there is no unwanted child, and that in the freest and most prosperous nation in the history of the world, we can make that the reality.
Do you think the unborn have constitutional rights?
I believe
they don't in our law right now, but do you believe they should?
I believe in the right to life, and
do you believe an unborn fetus has a constitutional right?
We are protected in this country from being denied life or liberty without due process of law. And I believe those protections should extend to the born and the unborn. But this is a long-term cause. And it'll be as much moral persuasion in America as political debates.
Shouldn't that be where it is, though? Shouldn't it be moral persuasion and not government mandate?
I really do believe, now that it's been returned to the political process, Chuck, that we have an incredible opportunity to demonstrate the real heart and compassion of the American people in this cause, to persuade our neighbors and friends to the day that abortion is not only illegal, but it's unthinkable. And when that day comes, then we'll someday institute in the laws of all 50 states.
There are a lot of women uncomfortable with the idea that a politician will make this decision for them.
I understand that. I do. But I really do believe that restoring the sanctity of life to the center of law in every state in this country is at the very heart of achieving a boundless future for the American people.
Still ahead, our panel is here with their thoughts on my interview with Mike Pence and the new special counsel investigation into Donald Trump. Plus, our Meet the Press Minute looks back at how Ronald Reagan answered the question of how old was too old to serve as president. Welcome back. The day after his granddaughter's wedding on the White House South Lawn, President Biden is celebrating an important event of his own today. It's his 80th birthday. Biden is now the oldest serving president in American history. It's a title previously held by Ronald Reagan. In today's Meet the Press Minute, we look back to 1974, when then Governor Reagan was in his early 60s. He was asked whether his age would be a factor in a presidential run.
He will be 63 years old on February 6th, and during a campaign period, of course, would be 65. Does the age seem to you realistically to be a factor that would operate against your candidacy for president?
Well, I think that's going to be a determination the people are going to make. Certainly, Jim, by the time of 1976, if it should be my decision that I am going to be involved in that race, and I think it's certainly too early to make that decision by a long way, the people will know my age, and they'll make that determination. We have had presidents that have pretty much spanned adulthood as to their age, and it has not seemed to affect the people.
To dig into the Meet the Press archive, scan the code on your screen right now. Visit NBCNews.com/MTP75. It's the website that is home to 75 of the biggest moments in Meet the Press history. When we come back, the panel. We are back. Panel is here. Anna Palmer, co-founder of Punchbowl News. Peter Baker, chief White House correspondent for the New York Times. He's also author of the book The Divider. Brendan Buck, former advisor to Speakers Paul Ryan and John Boehner. And Kimberly Atkins, Stohr, senior opinion writer for the Boston Globe. Peter, you wrote about the special counsel and sort of almost the darned if you do, darned if you don't moment that Merrick Garland was in. You know, and you saw it with Mike Pence and in my interview. There's a lot of Republicans that want to let Trump sort of dangle out there, but they're also not ready to jump on pushing him off either. Just
right. No, that's exactly right. Look, you're right. Garland had no choice, probably under the rules as they are established. He felt that it was an obvious case for a special counsel. But the idea of a special counsel is to make it seem like politics is not involved. And of course that was never going to work. Of course, Trump was never going to let that be a nonpartisan figure. He immediately attacks the special counsel as a political partisan witch hunter, the latest in a long string in his view. And therefore, we're right back where we started, which is that the investigation is seen through the lens of partisan politics. You know,
Anna, it was one of those, I guess if Garland could have done this differently, had it been a special counsel from the beginning.
Right. Was the delay kind of an opening for Republicans in a lot of ways? It wasn't just Trump. We've seen a lot of Republicans in the Senate and the House saying, all right, now it's time to impeach Merrick Garland. Now, you know, there should be a special counsel for Hunter Biden. I'm just saying these are the partisan attacks that you're going to hear over and over again for the next several months.
They're going to do everything they can to undermine this process. And I will tell you, when
they, though?
House Republicans.
Okay.
Newly in the majority, newly with committee hearings that they can call.
Is that a good focus?
It's absolutely not, but I will tell you, when I was on the Hill working for Speaker Ryan, we spent an incredible amount of time behind the scenes trying to get our members not to undermine the Mueller investigation. They wanted to do things. They wanted to try to meddle in that. And we had to say hard no, like we can't do this. This is important. I don't know that the current House of Representatives is set up to be that disciplined.
And I know that the DOJ and Merrick Garland wants to keep things unpolitical, but I think that's one of the things that he should have thought about in making the decision either to do it from the beginning. I think that he didn't need one at all. The regulations don't mandate this. He could have continued this investigation, and it should have gone a little faster.
Doesn't it feel like he is a character from the pre-Trump era?
Yes.
And that's sort of like what Garland's, you know, whatever you think, he's just sort of, isn't this the way we're supposed to do it? And you're like, right. Not the way in the Trump world. Yeah.
Right, a new era. But there is one thing that might be indicated here. The Merrick Garland has made a threshold decision, perhaps, that it is okay to charge a former president or a presidential candidate if the elements of the law are met. Because otherwise you wouldn't have bothered to appoint a special counsel. That's a pretty big step if, in fact, that's what's going through his mind right now.
All right, the other big event this weekend was this Republican Jewish Coalition event. You know, and it was interesting. Donald Trump, he ended up satelliting it in because I think he realized Ron DeSantis was stealing the show and no matter what. But he gave this rambling answer about the midterms, correctly noting the impact of abortion, but he never said the word. Meanwhile, Mike Pence is here telling me it's the greatest achievement of the administration.
I mean, one of the biggest divides, right? You have Donald Trump, who was pro-choice. I mean, Mike Pence, ever since I've covered politics, this is very core to who he is. Clearly not afraid that the American public might not be in the same place that Mike Pence is. But that's one of the few distinguishing factors, right? When you look at the two of them, Mike Pence kind of twisting himself into a pretzel in this whole interview where he didn't really want to say that the former president was wrong, that what happened on January 6th was wrong.
Brendan, he wants to run in the Trump administration more than Trump does.
Mike Pence is running what seems to be leading up to a campaign that would make a lot of sense if Donald Trump wasn't still around. He's the natural next in line, all the great things that we did. I'm separating myself from him a little bit. But he refuses to actually take on Donald Trump. And the reality is, as we know, he's running for president. Donald Trump is going to be a candidate.
He's going to take him on.
Exactly.
Trump will take Pence on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so we have a situation where, once again, you have Republicans sort of just hoping that he goes away and unwilling to attack him. Donald Trump is going to attack Mike Pence. He's going to attack Ron DeSantis. And to think that you can just sit there and wait for him to implode, I think, is a little naive.
But is there a little bit of Trump fatigue? I feel like I'm sensing it in the rank and file.
I think there's more than a little bit. The midterms were evidence of that, but it's not fatigue among the people, like including Mike Pence, who stood right next to.
Because they're afraid of Trump's base.
But it's an opportunity to say this is waning and we're going to break free and we're going to take a different path. But instead, Mike Pence tried to excuse Trump for everything other than trying to stop the certification of the election. It was It was Fauci's fault it was Mark Meadows' fault that he talked about disinfectant. Right. It was someone else's fault. It was lawyers' fault that he.
But where Mike Pence is very different. Where you're seeing a lot of the Republican Party saying that was, a 3-time loser. You have
Pence doesn't want to go there.
Not at all. No. I mean, it's pretty stunning compared to where the rest of the Republicans are.
Well, he's self-aware in that who else was going to make him vice president? Right. Ultimately, that's the issue he has. All right, guys, I have to go. Enjoy your Thanksgiving weekend. You guys are terrific. There's an unedited version of my Mike Pence interview, including approximately 30 minutes that we weren't able to air here at meetthepress.com. Please take a look at it. That's all we have for the day. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the Thanksgiving holiday. We're back next week. We don't bring leftovers. We'll be bringing real Meet the Press, because if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
Celebrating 75 years of Meet the Press, the longest-running show on television.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.